Grandpa, after the party, they're going to steal your money. Sophia's voice was barely louder than the wind that stirred the roses, but it cut through me sharper than any storm. She stood near the edge of the garden, sunlight catching in her tangled hair, hands clenched in the pockets of her cardigan like she was holding in something too big for a child to carry. I had just bent down to check the birdbath, something Evelyn used to nag me about before every family gathering, when Sophia appeared beside me like a secret only the house could see. I turned slowly, careful not to startle her. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Her eyes darted to the patio, to the figures of her parents moving between folding tables and streamers. Derek's booming laugh carrying across the yard, Simone's heels clicking against the flagstone like punctuation marks in a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Sophia leaned in. "They said after the party ends, they're going to ask you to sign something. They said it's just a form, but they don't want you to read it." My hand froze on the edge of the basin. I kept my face still blank as an unused check, but something inside me shifted, like the quiet creak of an old beam under weight. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice low, measured. "Because Mom said you're too tired to handle everything now, and Dad said they could make it look like it was your idea." Her eyes searched mine for something, maybe safety, maybe belief. I gave her both. I crouched down, brushing some soil off my knee, and pretended to examine a wilting lily stem. "You did the right thing telling me," I said, picking my words like I was building a bridge. "But let's keep this between us for now, okay?" She nodded. "Will you be okay?" "Better than they think," I said, and smiled, not because I felt like smiling, but because she needed it. From the garden path, the house looked as it always did before a family event. Too clean, too staged, too quiet. The bunting flapped in the breeze, blue and gold like a small-town mayor's campaign. Simone had insisted we host it here this year, her idea of honoring tradition. She'd said, "I should have known then." Derek was on the back deck, drink in hand, recounting some exaggerated story to a neighbor I barely recognized. His gestures were too wide, his smile too shiny. The kind of grin a man wears when he's trying to sell you something. My son had always been charming, he learned it from me, but lately, charm had turned into choreography. There was a timing to his calls, a cadence to his concern, and now, thanks to Sophia, I knew why. I touched the top of her head lightly and stood. "Go help your dad with the balloons," I said gently, "and don't worry about me." She hesitated for a breath, then ran off, her small shoes crunching over gravel. I watched her disappear around the corner and then turned toward the house, the foundation I had laid with my own hands decades ago. If they thought I would give that up with a smile and a signature, they didn't know the man who'd built this place from poured concrete and second-hand lumber. I passed through the French doors into the kitchen where the air smelled like oversugared frosting and forced nostalgia. On the counter, a sheet cake read, "To family and future," a phrase so vague it could bless a birth or bury a will. I set the kettle on the stove, more for the ritual than the tea. My hands moved with the ease of habit, but my mind had already shifted into blueprint mode. Derek and Simone planned to use the celebration as cover to grease the wheels with wine and warmth, then slide paper in front of me when the guests left. Maybe they assumed I'd be too tired to read, or too lonely to fight. Maybe they thought Sophia wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care. But they were wrong. She noticed. She warned me. And that meant she still saw something in me worth protecting. I looked at the clock. 2:13 p.m. The party would peak around 5. By 6, the guests would be trickling out. By 7, they'd make their move. I smiled at the tea kettle as it began to rumble. Let them think the house was quiet. Let them think the old man had no teeth. The game had started. They just didn't know which one of us was playing. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed wasn't the guests or the music, it was the banner stretched across the porch rail. "Family is forever." Thick cursive script printed on vinyl, not hand-painted, not weather-worn, just sterile and staged. Below it, Simone stood with her arms folded, watching the valet shuffle cars like puzzle pieces. giving direction she didn't need to give. Her smile when she saw me arrive was all gloss and no warmth. "Arthur," she called, like I was the guest of honor at a gala she forgot to care about. I stepped out of the truck slowly, letting my knees stretch before I walked toward her. "Quite the setup," I said, gesturing to the flower arches and silver tablecloths. "You expecting the governor?" She laughed too quickly. "Only the most important man in our lives." Her hand fluttered to my arm. "You've done so much for all of us. We wanted to make today special." I smiled, the kind of smile you use to accept a compliment you didn't earn. "It's certainly elaborate." From the driveway, the backyard looked like a magazine spread. White folding chairs arranged in militant symmetry, tables lined with centerpieces that smelled more like florist shop than home. Little flags with guests' names stabbed through canapes like markers at an estate sale. Kids darted between adults with painted faces and gift bags shaped like treasure chests. Someone had hired a string quartet. I half expected to see a champagne fountain by the hedge. Derek was near the grill, manning it like a general, flipping steaks that probably cost more than I spent on groceries last week. He saw me and raised a pair of tongs in greeting. "Dad, just in time. Hope you're hungry." "Always," I called back, though I wasn't. Not for food, not for flattery. Derek crossed the lawn, wiping his hands on a towel, his voice already shifting into performance mode. "Big turnout, huh? We wanted to give you something nice. A thank you, you know." "For what?" I asked, keeping it light. "Just being you," he said. Like that meant something. He handed me a glass of lemonade without asking if I wanted one. It tasted like a mix of sugar and persuasion. Simone reappeared beside him with a gift bag, heavy, glossy, gold foil, thrusting it into my hand. "Just a little token," she said. "Open it later. We want you to relax today." I nodded, tucked it under my arm like a trophy I hadn't earned. My chair was at the head table, right next to the cake and directly beneath the banner. My name was printed in calligraphy on the place card, centered above a plate of linen-folded napkins and sterling silverware that hadn't been mine in decades. I took my seat and looked out over the crowd, cousins, colleagues, distant in-laws all dressed for the camera, none of them knowing what the real show was. Every toast, every laugh, every carefully timed memory was a layer in the performance. I heard phrases like generational wealth and honoring his legacy float by, slipped into conversations like seasoning. I nodded, smiled, chuckled when expected. The perfect grateful patriarch. I watched Simone hover near the drinks table, whispering to a man I didn't recognize. He handed her a manila envelope and disappeared into the kitchen. I sipped my lemonade and filed the image away. Derek kept returning to my side, like a satellite orbiting its source of power. "We've been talking about the future, Dad. Lot of opportunities ahead. You've built so much, it's time to enjoy it without worrying about the details." I nodded again. "That's kind of you. You deserve it," he said. "We just want to lift the load." It wasn't just the party that was overdone, it was the language, the gestures, the gift-wrapped guilt. I looked across the yard and spotted Sophia near the garden fence, her face serious as she tied a ribbon around a sapling. She glanced over once and I gave her the smallest nod. Her warning from earlier still echoed beneath all this noise. By the time dessert was served, the sky had dipped into gold and coral, and Derek's arm was around my shoulder, guiding me toward a quieter corner. "Let's have a little talk before the guests start leaving," he said, just casual enough to feel practiced. "Of course," I said, smiling. "Let me just stretch my legs first." I wandered back inside, through the kitchen, out the side door, past the cluttered garden beds Evelyn had once kept immaculate. I needed a few minutes to clear the sugar from my head and steel myself for what was coming. They thought the party softened me. They thought the flattery bought trust. But they forgot I've worn masks longer than they've worn wedding rings, and I can see through shine to find the hook beneath it. They called this a celebration. I knew it was a setup, but I let them think otherwise because nothing makes a trap spring faster than a man who smiles and stays still. The thing about houses is they carry sound differently when people think you're not listening. Walls don't muffle secrets. They hold them, cradle them like hands around a flame. After dessert, I excused myself, said I needed to use the restroom. But really, I just needed a moment without eyes on me, without Derek's performative concern or Simone's syrupy tone. I passed down the hallway that led to the den, where the door was cracked just enough for voices to slip through like steam. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I didn't stop either. "Just wait until the account transfer is signed," Simone's voice said. Crisp, confident. "He'll think it's just a backup plan. We'll file the rest Monday. No probate. No delay. He'll be tired after all this," Derek replied. Quieter, more anxious. "He won't read the fine print. We'll keep it clean. Folder's already prepped, just needs his signature. One push, and it's done." Simone laughed then, a dry, short sound. "He wants to believe we're helping him. Let him. All we need is 10 minutes and a pen." My hand hovered on the doorframe, heart steady but sinking. 10 minutes and a pen. That's all they thought I was worth. Not the years of work, not the sacrifices, not the debt I shouldered to make Derek's education possible, not the money loaned to start his business, not the roof repaired after their last storm, not the hours spent babysitting Sophia when they needed a weekend away, not the house itself, every beam, every board, every nail I'd set with Evelyn's voice in my ear. Just 10 minutes, just a pen. I backed away before they saw me. Footsteps soft, slower than breath. I returned to the porch like nothing had shifted, like the world hadn't just narrowed into something sharp and surgical. Derek waved at me from across the lawn. I lifted my glass in response. The act was still on. The final scene was just beginning. I slipped my phone from my pocket and opened my messages. My fingers moved without rush, but they knew exactly where to go. First, to Sam Whitaker. We'd served on a zoning board together, but more than that, he was the kind of man who read every clause and always brought an extra pen. "Sam," I typed, "need you at my place tomorrow morning. 9:30 sharp. Legal matter. Quiet." Then to Margaret Ellis, retired notary, who lived 2 doors down and never missed a sunrise. "Margaret, are you free tomorrow morning at 9:30? Need a notary. No rush, but presence appreciated." I hit send on both and tucked the phone away. No dramatics, no declarations. Just the placement of pieces on the board. The party had shifted into that slow end-of-day energy now. Laughter lower, drinks fewer, music fading into background hum. Simone was near the patio, chatting with someone's cousin about transitional ownership and streamlining legacy. Her voice smooth as ever. But now I knew exactly which script she was reading from. Derek caught my eye again. Nodded once like we were in on something together. He thought I'd be flattered. He thought I was ready to be handled. I gave him the smallest nod back, enough to keep his assumptions intact. The longer they believed I was going along, the more rope they'd feed me. And when the time came, I'd be the one holding it. Sophia ran past, clutching a helium balloon by the string, her eyes bright and unburdened for the moment. She didn't see me watching her. She didn't see Simone glance over, calculating. But I saw everything. They wanted to steal the future while dressing it up in gratitude. They'd chosen the day of laughter and cake to make their move because they thought sentiment would soften my spine. But they forgot I'm not a man who crumbles under smiles. I've built too much, lost too much, buried too much, and I've learned that nothing is more dangerous than someone who smiles while they circle you. By the time the last car pulled out of the driveway, and the chairs were folded, and the banner started sagging at one end, I had already poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat at the table Evelyn and I had bought 30 years ago, and laid out a clean sheet from my yellow legal pad. At the top, I wrote one word in capital letters: war. Underneath it, I made my list. Estate protections, will update, new deed, transfer lock, independent evaluations, file alerts, witness affidavits. They thought they were moving in secret, but they were building a case for me, and I intended to use every piece. The house was too quiet when I got back. Not the good kind of quiet that settles over a place when everyone's gone to bed or the wind has paused to breathe, but the kind that holds its breath like it's waiting for the next move. I stood in the front hall for a long moment, keys still in my hand, shoes still on, just listening. The echo off the hardwood felt sharper than usual. I set the keys in the bowl by the door, unbuttoned my cuffs, and walked to the study. The floorboards creaked under me, not a complaint, just a reminder that they knew me, that I was still the one living here. I opened the closet, reached past Evelyn's old winter coat, and found the metal box tucked behind a stack of tax folders. The lock gave with the first turn 112379, our wedding date. It never failed me. The lid lifted with a soft scrape, revealing what I already knew would be there. The blue ledger wrapped in plastic, worn at the edges, corners bent from years of use. I carried it to the kitchen, sat at the table, and let the overhead light cast that familiar cone of yellow across the surface. The cover read, "Personal, do not discard," in block letters, Evelyn's handwriting beneath mine, from back when we still thought such warnings mattered. I flipped past the first few pages, grocery budgets, travel expenses, house repairs. Then came the pages that mattered now. Derek's name showed up for the first time in a 1,997 entry, 600 for broken axle, paid to mechanic directly. After that, the entries grew. 1. 200 for tuition shortfall. 2. 400 for medical deductible Simone. 9. 800 business startup bridge, no interest. Over the years, the numbers had grown, but the format had stayed the same: date, amount, reason, paid in full, no contracts, no expectations, just a father helping his son. But now, that ledger wasn't just a record of generosity, it was evidence. I flipped through the pages slowly, letting the ink whisper back what I'd almost forgotten. HVAC repair, mortgage gap during the recession, Sophia's school fundraiser, grocery bills when Derek was between jobs. One by one, I wrote the numbers into a new column on a fresh legal pad. At the top, in large block letters, I wrote the title, "They Think I Forgot." I underlined it twice. 74 entries. That's how many acts of support were logged under Derek and Simone's names across 3 decades. 74 instances of stepping in without being asked twice, of absorbing their stress, smoothing their messes, covering their shortfalls without hesitation, all of it done quietly, without fanfare, and without so much as a thank you that lasted more than a week. But they thought I'd forget. They thought age had made me soft in the head. They thought a few compliments and a catered celebration could blind me to the weight of all I'd carried. I wrote each item with care, noting the date and context. I didn't need to prove anything to myself, but I needed the lines to exist, to be real on paper the way they had always been real in sacrifice. At the bottom of the page, I totaled the amounts, nearly 200,000 over the years, not including gifts, not including interest, just support, freely given. I reached for a second sheet. This one was for assets, property tax receipts, home value appraisals, utility bills, maintenance logs, everything they thought I'd stopped tracking, everything they were circling like vultures. The kitchen clock ticked just past midnight when I stood again. I returned to the safe, pulled out a second file: original deed, title insurance, Evelyn's will, and mine, freshly updated 3 months ago. I laid the documents in order beside the ledger and took a photograph of the spread with my phone. I wasn't taking chances. I uploaded the photos to a flash drive and labeled it, "If They Push." Then I did it all again with a second flash drive and slipped it inside the lining of my old coat, the one hanging in the garage, a third hook from the left. They thought I'd forgotten, but I was remembering with perfect clarity, the weight of their smiles, the script they'd rehearsed, the trap they thought I wouldn't notice. I set the ledger back in the safe, locked it, and placed the key under the ceramic heron on the mantel. Evelyn's favorite piece, the one she always said looked like it was waiting to speak. "Maybe it's just watching," she once told me. "Maybe it sees what we miss." I think it always did, And tonight, so did I. It was just after 5 when I felt the weight of the celebration begin to shift. The laughter had dulled into repetition. The drinks were being poured a little slower, and the conversations had circled back around to secondhand stories I'd already smiled through once. Derek was on his 3rd plate of ribs, and Simone was walking the perimeter like a politician, touching shoulders, lowering her voice for effect. I caught her glancing at the envelope she'd placed under the gift table, and that was my cue. Timing matters when you're planning an escape. Too early, and it draws suspicion. Too late, and the net drops before you've moved. So I waited until the band took a break and the cake plates started coming back scraped clean. Then I pushed my chair back with just enough sound to signal something, but not enough to draw a crowd. I stood slowly, placed a hand at the small of my back like a man carrying the polite weight of old age, and let out a soft breath. Simone was the first to notice. "Arthur, are you all right?" she asked, coming toward me with that bright concern she wears like perfume pleasant from afar, cloying up close. I smiled. "I'm fine, dear. Just feeling a bit tired. Think I'll lie down for a little while. It's been a long day." Derek stood too, setting his drink down. "You sure, Dad? We were hoping to talk later, after the guests." "I know," I said gently, "but I don't want to be half awake for it. Let me rest a bit. We can talk tomorrow if it's important." Simone's lips pressed into a line, but she nodded. "Of course. We'll wrap things up here." "Thank you," I said, patting Derek on the shoulder. "You did a beautiful job today. Everyone's having a wonderful time." I made my way toward the house, passing by little Sophia, who was sitting on the porch steps with a slice of cake and a plastic fork. She looked up at me, eyes wide with silent understanding. I gave her a wink. "Hold down the fort, Commander," I said. She smiled and gave me a tiny salute. I stepped through the house and out the side door, moving like a man who just needed a nap. Once out of view, I moved faster, more deliberate. The truck keys were already in my pocket. I slipped behind the wheel and turned the ignition as quiet as it would allow. The engine hummed like a secret. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need the noise. The sky was fading into that soft, endless kind of blue that only shows up at the end of a long day, the kind of sky you can trust. I drove the back way home, avoiding the main road where guests were still parking and shuffling gift bags. Gravel crunched under my tires, and the shadows stretched long across the empty fields. It was a road I'd driven for years, long before Derek knew how to hold a steering wheel, long before Simone knew our gate code, long before the idea of estate management and asset transition were whispered behind doors in my own home. I rolled down the window. Let the air in. Let it move through me like breath that had been waiting too long to be exhaled. The air smelled like cedar and dry earth and the hint of someone burning leaves a few miles away. Honest smells. Old smells. The kind that didn't ask anything from you. I looked up at the stretch of sky above the tree line. It wasn't spectacular or showy, just steady. A good sky. A familiar one. I trusted that sky more than I trusted the people who smiled at me today. When I reached the house, the porch light blinked on automatically, as if the place had sensed my return. I sat for a moment in the driveway, engine off, listening to the creak of the settling frame, the chirp of one brave cricket somewhere in the flower bed. This was mine. The house. The quiet. The memory of Evelyn's laughter echoing in the kitchen. Sophia's hand in mine as we traced the bird feeders last spring. None of it bought with a signature on a line. None of it earned through persuasion or form slid across a table. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air was cooler, still holding the late afternoon. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need to see everything. I just needed to feel that it was still mine. I stood in the living room, breathing slow, letting my body adjust to the stillness after the theater I'd left behind. Then I walked to the kitchen, pulled out the yellow pad from the drawer, and wrote one new heading across the top. What they think I'll do. Underneath, I listed everything I wouldn't sign, agree, surrender, forget, and then I wrote the thing I would do. Win, quietly, thoroughly, on my own terms. I set the pad down and made a cup of coffee. The party might still be going on back at Derek's, but the real work had already begun right here, in the silence they never imagined I'd use against them. I didn't sleep that night, not in any meaningful way. I closed my eyes around 1:30, opened them again at 3, and gave up pretending by 4. The house was still, the kind of still that hums low beneath your ribs when you know something's coming and there's no use in waiting to see how bad the storm gets. So I put on the blue shirt Evelyn always said made me look like I had sense, and I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, a pencil, and the kind of calm that only comes when you've stopped hoping things will fix themselves. The plan wasn't going to write itself, and if I didn't put it on paper now, they'd write one for me. I started with the bones. Step 1. Redraw the estate plan. Not revise, not adjust. Redraw. Every name, every clause, every dollar shifted to reflect reality, not loyalty. Derek and Simone could still have their opinions, but they wouldn't have access. I wrote out the distribution terms from scratch, excluding them from executorship and removing their contingent authority from the health directive. They'd taken advantage of trust. So I removed it surgically, silently, legally. Then I turned to the heart of the plan. Sophia, the only one who saw me. The only one who said the quiet part out loud when everyone else wore masks and smiles. I opened a new file and titled it, Sophia Trust. No fanfare, no sentiment, just steel. I made the terms strict. No access by guardians, no discretionary withdrawals, and no early invasions disguised as family emergencies. The funds would be protected until she turned 25. Until then, a third-party trustee would hold it under my instruction, and I knew exactly who that would be. Marlene Carmichael, Evelyn's oldest friend, a woman who once ran a nonprofit, balanced books better than most CPAs, and who never once lied to my face. I'd call her in the morning. She wouldn't say no. Not for Sophia, not for Evelyn. The documents needed to look unimpeachable, so I started building the paper trail to support them. I pulled out last year's tax filings and copied the page that listed my annual donations. I wrote a memo to file. These reflect long-standing charitable habits, not signs of diminished capacity. I gathered the receipts from the renovations I'd paid for: foundation work, roof replacement, plumbing overhaul, and attached them to photos of the finished projects. I labeled each envelope with the date and description. No detail was too small. If they tried to argue that I was losing track of things, I wanted to show them just how many things I could track at once. I moved on to bank statements. I highlighted every transfer to Derek and Simone over the past 3 years, then copied the corresponding text messages from my old phone where Derek had asked for help. Dad, could you spot me until Friday? Simone's medical deductible came through. Can you help again? Tight on taxes this quarter, just need a buffer. Each message polite. Each reply from me immediate. I printed the thread, stapled it, labeled it. I wasn't just building a defense. I was building a timeline, a narrative, a history that couldn't be reshaped with crocodile tears and family dinner speeches. They wanted to treat me like a doddering old man too sentimental to notice the slow theft of control. They didn't understand I'd been a builder my whole life, not just of homes, but of structures that hold under pressure. By the time the sun cracked over the horizon, the kitchen table looked like a lawyer's war desk. Neat piles of proof, copies ready for notarization, blank forms waiting for fresh ink. I drafted a letter to my attorney, instructing him to update my will accordingly and to file the new trust documents in a protected repository. I asked him to include a clause stating that any party who contests the will or trust would forfeit their share immediately. I didn't want this dragged into court after I was gone. I wanted the doors locked before anyone tried to pick them. I printed 2 copies of everything, one for Fletcher, one for the safe. Then I slid a third into a sealed envelope marked "Open only if they push." That one I placed in the lockbox behind the bookshelf, beneath Evelyn's pressed flower album. I looked around the room, at the scuff marks on the floor where Sophia's chair scraped every time she kicked her legs, at the chipped paint on the sill where Evelyn used to rest her coffee mug. at the photos along the wall that had seen more honesty and silence than I'd heard in months. This wasn't paranoia. It was preservation. And now the preservation had teeth. I stood, stretched the knots out of my back, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. Today, I would act like everything was fine. I'd wave. I'd nod. I'd smile through whatever Derek and Simone threw my way. But behind the curtain, the foundation was already poured, the beams already set, and the locks already turning. I wasn't just protecting what was mine. I was protecting what would one day be hers. They thought they could take everything after the party. But by the time they arrived at my door with pens and plans, they'd find out they were already too late. By the time the clock struck 9, I was already parked outside Gerald White's office. Second floor, corner unit, and same building where I used to go every April with Evelyn to file taxes and sit through mutual eye rolls at financial jargon we pretended to understand. This time, though, I wasn't here for bookkeeping. I was here for control. Gerald opened the door himself, no assistant, no formality. Just a quiet, "Morning, Arthur," and a glance that told me he already knew this wasn't a social call. "You still trust me to move quick?" I asked. He nodded and motioned me in. His office was exactly as I remembered it, piles of manila folders, 2 clocks, one always wrong, and the framed certificate on the wall slightly crooked since 1992. But today there was no time for memory lane. I sat down, handed him a folder, and said, "We're revoking everything. Powers of attorney, beneficiary transfer clauses. All of it." He adjusted his glasses, skimmed the documents I'd prepared the night before, and let out a low whistle. "Clean work," he said. "But this is going to ruffle feathers. Then it's about time they get ruffled," I said. "I'm done being their feather pillow." I pulled out the envelope with the trust documents, notarized and signed. Gerald flipped through them with his accountant's precision, nodding as he read. "You gave Sophia a silent trust. Smart. Keeps it out of probate and avoids manipulation." I tapped the table. "She's the only one who's never asked me for anything." At 10:15 sharp, Marcia walked in, my old firm's accountant. Back in the day, she ran forensic audits on corporate fraud cases and could sniff out a cooked ledger from across the state line. She hugged me, tight and brief, then got straight to it. "You want this sealed airtight?" "Yes," I said, "like it's going into space." I slid the third folder to her, with the updated portfolio breakdown and income stream directives. "We'll establish quarterly disbursements to Sophia's trust, minimize tax exposure, and flag any account activity over $200. If someone tries to siphon funds, the system locks." She finished. "Good. That's what we want." At 11, the notary arrived, Morris Kim, retired Navy, ran a mobile service now. He was prompt, thorough, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. Within 20 minutes, every document had a signature, a seal, and a timestamp. I revoked the durable power of attorney that had Derek's name on it, something I'd signed years ago under the impression it would be used in emergencies only. I looked at the ink drying and thought about how close I'd come to handing over the keys to my own downfall. "You want a paper trail of the revocation?" Morris asked. 3 copies, I said. 1 for the safe, 1 for my lawyer, and 1 for the trust archive, and email scans to me and Gerald. Done. He clicked his case shut and tipped his head. "Smart move, sir. Not everyone thinks ahead." I appreciated that he didn't offer pity. Just process. That's what I needed now. Not hand-holding. System fortification. Marcia pulled out her laptop and showed me the digital vault she'd prepared 2-factor access, mirrored backups, end-to-end encryption. I nodded. "Lock it." She did. The system pinged twice. The vault was now live. All prior beneficiaries, authority grants, automatic transfers, and joint account privileges frozen. They'd need a court order and a constitutional amendment to touch it now. Gerald leaned back. "What about healthcare proxies?" I slid another envelope across. "Already reassigned. To Dr. Mahmoud. You remember him? Evelyn's oncologist?" He's more family than Derek is. Gerald smiled, not kindly. This is going to hit them like a brick wall. Then I suggest they stop running headfirst. I stood up, shook each hand with gratitude but no celebration. This wasn't a victory lap. This was prevention. This was me stepping in before they could rewrite the ending of my story. As I walked out of the office, sunlight cutting through the blinds in streaks across the dusty carpet, I felt something I hadn't in months grounded. They had expected me to be asleep at the wheel, foggy with age, grateful for cake and compliments. But I'd seen war. I'd buried a wife. I'd built a life from nothing. And I wasn't about to let a polished party and a sly signature undo all of it. By noon, the documents were filed, the system sealed, and the game they thought they were playing had already changed. I wasn't the old man they thought I was. I was the architect of their undoing, and I had just locked the door from the inside. They pulled into the driveway around noon, just as I was finishing my coffee. Derek's luxury SUV eased to a stop like it was gliding in on good intentions. Simone stepped out first, balancing a tray of pastries like some peace offering, her smile already plastered in place. Derek followed with that hesitant, overly casual gait he used when he thought he had to disarm someone. I stood at the doorway, steady and unreadable, the same way I used to wait for opposing counsel in court, silent, still, and 4 steps ahead. "Dad," Derek called out as he walked up. "We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd drop by. Simone made those lemon bars you like." "How thoughtful," I said, opening the door wide enough for both of them to see the dining room behind me. The table was already set, not with plates and forks, but with files, legal pads, and 3 chairs already occupied. Gerald, Marcia, and Morris sat like a jury that had been waiting since dawn. "Oh," Simone blinked, her smile twitching. "Company? Just tying up some paperwork," I said evenly. "Why don't you come in?" They hesitated, their eyes darting past me. Derek cleared his throat. "Actually, Dad, we wanted to say sorry. About the other night. About the documents." "Oh?" I raised an eyebrow. "What about them?" "We realize now we may have pushed too hard. It wasn't the right time. The party was, maybe too much." Simone placed the pastry tray on the edge of the table, careful not to knock over the legal folders. "We didn't mean to overwhelm you," she added sweetly. "We were just trying to be responsible, to help you manage everything." "Interesting," I said, walking over to the table and taking a seat, because what I heard in the hallway didn't sound like help. It sounded like expectation, control. Their faces didn't fall, not right away. It was more like watching the tide slowly retreat from a shoreline, first the blink, then the flush, then the stiffness in their shoulders. Derek took a seat without being invited. Simone remained standing, arms crossed, pastry tray now forgotten. "Dad, you're misunderstanding what you heard," Derek said. "We were discussing options, just long-term care stuff." "You mean transferring control of my estate into your hands?" I asked. "Because that's what was in the document folder Simone tried to slip me while I was eating dessert." Simone let out a tiny gasp, too polished to sound real. "It wasn't like that. And the power of attorney form you nearly had me sign at the fireplace?" I said. "Was that not like that either?" Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. "So what, you're setting us up for some public scolding now? You think these people," he gestured to Gerald and Marcia, "are here to what, shame us?" "No," I said, voice calm. "They're here because yesterday I revoked every power you had, froze every transfer route, and created a trust that you will never touch. Ever." There was a beat of silence. Gerald shifted slightly, pen tapping softly on his pad. Marcia watched Simone with an expression colder than a judge's gavel. "I gave you everything," I said. "Help with the down payment. I've covered your failed ventures. Sent Sophia to private school when you couldn't handle tuition. I even paid for your 3rd IVF round because you said Simone couldn't cope with another miscarriage. And I never once asked for repayment. I only ever asked for respect. But last night showed me what that bought me." Derek leaned forward, voice tight. "We made one mistake." "No," I said. "You made a plan. A calculated, rehearsed plan. But you forgot something. I wasn't just a father. I was a litigator. I built airtight contracts while you were still asking me for lunch money. And you thought I'd just roll over and sign? Simone finally spoke, her voice low and bitter. You're trying to punish us. No, I said again. I'm trying to protect myself. And more importantly, I'm protecting Sophia. Because she warned me. She saw through you before I did. Derek shot up from his chair. You're giving it to her? She's a child. She's a better judge of character than either of you, I said. And she never asked me for a cent. Simone's hands trembled. We're your family. So was Evelyn, I replied, standing slowly. And she would be ashamed to see what you've become. I walked to the door and held it open. This is still my home, but not everything in it belongs to you. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then, silently, Derek turned. Simone followed, lemon bars untouched, her heels clicking like punctuation across the tile. When the door shut behind them, I felt no triumph, only clarity. The celebration mask had cracked, and what lay beneath was not grief but relief. I still had my name. I still had my mind. And now, I had my fortress. Simone reached into her leather tote with the same deliberate grace I'd watched her use at charity auctions, drawing out a manila folder as if it were a bouquet of roses, and not what it truly was, a dagger wrapped in ribbon. We brought some papers just in case, she said, smoothing the folder against her lap like it needed calming. Updated documents. Nothing urgent, of course. Just estate simplification, asset flow clarification, a few small administrative. Simone, I interrupted softly, why don't you hand them over? She looked up, just slightly startled, then passed them across the table. The folder was heavier than I expected, pages thick with clauses, amendments, footnotes, and signatures they were sure I wouldn't read. I didn't open it. Instead, I placed it down in front of me like a bomb I had already diffused. Would you mind? I said, my voice now sharp enough to carve silence into the room. Reading aloud, Clause 7.2. The stillness that followed was exquisite. I watched her pupils shift from me to the folder, then flicker to Derek, whose jaw tightened as if bracing for an impact. Clause 7? She asked. Yes, I said. 7.2. Should be about 4 pages in. Her fingers hesitated. Then she opened the folder and began to flip through it. She found the clause. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Go on, I prompted. I'm hard of hearing these days, remember? Her voice cracked the moment it started. In the event of permanent incapacity or voluntary delegation, the grantor's designated financial proxy shall obtain irrevocable authority over all active and dormant estate accounts, including but not limited to. I recited the rest from memory. Her mouth fell open slightly. Derek's face flushed deep red. How did you? Because it's identical. I cut in, word for word, to the document you slipped me at the party. Same clause, same coercion. You just updated the date and changed the header. You even kept the same legal formatting Gerald used to use 5 years ago. And yet, I tilted my head. You expected me to be too distracted by birthday candles to notice? Derek leaned forward, his voice stiff with fury masked as offense. We were trying to make things easier, streamlined. We didn't want to burden you with technicalities. You mean you didn't want to burden me with choices? I said. Because that clause? It's not about simplification. It's about erasure. Simone pressed the folder closed. We thought you trusted us, she said. I did, I said. For too long, Derek scoffed. So what, you're going to accuse us of theft? Of manipulation? You don't have any proof. Proof? I said, standing slowly. Clause 7.2 is my proof. So is the voice memo Sophia recorded. So is the email I intercepted from your paralegal to my broker. And let's not forget the call Gerald overheard from the notary office about a rush transfer document sent last Thursday. Derek went pale. Simone sat still, lips frozen in a half-formed denial. You planned to move everything under your control, and then what? Tuck me into a retirement condo with a nice view and no phone line? I asked. You underestimate how sharp an old man can be when everyone starts speaking softly around him. Derek stood up, fists clenched. We're not villains, Dad. Then stop acting like ones, I replied, steel laced through every syllable. You came into my house. You threw a celebration not to honor me but to distract me. And then you attempted to manipulate my legacy like a boardroom acquisition. You're just angry, Simone whispered, eyes damp now. A late bid for sympathy. No, I said. I'm awake. You mistook silence for surrender. You thought because I didn't challenge you, I didn't see you. But I saw everything. I turned toward Gerald, who silently opened his file and displayed a notarized summary of the new trust. One that secured Sophia's future. One that bypassed every backdoor clause they had tried to sneak in. This is your inheritance, I told them. A memory of the moment you lost your masks and showed me who you really were. Derek stormed toward the door. You'll regret this, he snapped. I already did, I said. But not anymore. And with that he was gone. Simone hesitated for just a second longer, then followed him. Folder clutched like a useless relic of a plan that failed not because it wasn't clever but because it wasn't clean. The performance was over, and I had seen through every act. After Derek and Simone slammed the door behind them, their footsteps echoing down my porch like the final chords of a bad song, I sat back down at the table and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The silence wasn't empty, it was earned. Gerald offered a tight nod, packed up the trust documents, and patted my shoulder before stepping outside to make some follow-up calls. I was alone for a moment, or so I thought. Then I heard a soft shuffle from the hallway. A hesitant pair of feet, smaller than any adult's, crept closer until Sophia appeared in the doorway. She looked different now, not like the little girl who'd whispered secrets into my coat at the party, but like someone who had watched a storm pass and still stood tall. Her eyes met mine, cautious but steady, and without a word, she walked over to me. In her hands was a folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper, the kind I kept stacked near the fireplace for winter sketching. She handed it to me and didn't say a word. I unfolded it slowly. It wasn't a typical child's drawing of stick figures or rainbows. It was meticulous, deliberate, bold in both color and message. A large wooden treasure chest, drawn with a deep brown crayon and locked tightly with a golden clasp, sat squarely in the center. Across the top of the chest, in her careful block letters, was a name, Sophia. Nothing else, no keys, no open lid, just her name, guarded, whole, untouchable. I looked up at her, my throat thick. You drew this? She nodded. Last night? She said quietly. Before the party. Why a treasure chest? I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it from her. She shrugged. Because you always say people hide things in treasure chests, things they're afraid of losing. I nodded slowly, holding the drawing like it was more valuable than any check or deed. And the lock? I asked. You said a good lock keeps the wrong people out, she said. So I added one, so it stays mine. I smiled, not the kind I used when pretending at family functions, but the kind that felt like sunlight cracking through an old, dust-covered window. This, I said, lifting the drawing gently, is all the legacy I need. Sophia tilted her head, uncertain. I tapped the chest where her name was written. Not theirs, I continued. Not their signatures. Not their plans. I folded the paper gently and slid it into the inside pocket of my blazer, the same pocket that once held checks for Derek's business or tuition receipts I'd paid without fanfare. What you gave me just now, I said, is worth more than anything they tried to take. She came closer, standing by my side now. Her hand found mine on the table. Small, soft, but solid. I didn't know what to do when I heard them talking, she said after a long silence. But I didn't want them to hurt you. You did exactly the right thing, I said. You told me the truth. That's the rarest gift of all. She leaned her head against my arm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of something good pressing into my side, not obligation, not guilt, not fear. Just love. A kind of love that wasn't begging to be noticed or proven, but one that simply existed and endured. "Will they come back?" she asked. I looked toward the door, where Derek and Simone had vanished, like shadows chased from light. "Maybe," I said. "But if they do, they won't find what they came for, because I already gave it away." "To who?" she asked. I smiled again. "To someone who drew a treasure chest with her name on it." She grinned, a real grin this time, toothy and warm. The fire crackled softly behind us, and I reached for the tea I hadn't touched all morning. The cup was cold, but it didn't matter. "You know what we're going to do next?" I asked. She looked up, curious. "We're going to plant a tree," I said. "Right here, on this land. And someday, when you're older, you'll sit under it with someone you love, and you'll tell them about the day your name became more powerful than any signature." Sophia didn't answer right away. She just nodded, the way people do when they're making a memory in real time. I didn't need her to understand it all now. What mattered was that the legacy was sealed not in a vault or a ledger, but in the quiet courage of a child who believed me when I said her name mattered. That's the inheritance I wanted. That's the one I would protect, forever. Simone came back before I expected her to. I had barely returned from walking Sophia down the drive for her mother to pick her up when I saw Simone's sleek silver SUV pull up with a little too much urgency for someone who supposedly came in peace. She stepped out alone this time. No Derek. No sweetened smiles. Just the clipped pace of high heels across brick and a black leather folder clenched too tightly in her manicured hand. I opened the door before she could knock. "Arthur," she said flatly, stepping forward like I'd invited her. I let her in without a word, my face calm, unreadable. I motioned toward the living room. The notary, my lawyer, and Gerald were still there, sipping tea in silence. Simone gave them all a once-over, her face tightening. "Still playing courtroom in your living room?" she muttered. "This won't look good, Arthur." She paced in front of us like she had something rehearsed. "I tried being kind," she said, tone brittle. "I told Derek not to push. But you're letting that child, you know who I mean, get into your head. She's just a kid. This new will, this trust, it's clearly a manipulation, and I'll challenge it." She slapped the folder onto the table. "Legally." My lawyer looked at me for a cue, but I held up my hand. "Simone," I said, my voice even, "you're accusing a 9-year-old of financial influence?" She flinched, just slightly, before collecting herself. "Don't twist my words. I'm saying you're vulnerable. You've been emotional, ever since Edward passed." She used my late brother's name like it was a chess piece. "And if you think you can just change everything based on sketches and bedtime whispers, we'll be seeing you in court." Gerald looked ready to leap from his chair, but again I signaled silence. I rose slowly and walked to the sideboard. From the drawer, I retrieved a small black digital recorder. I turned to her as I clicked play. At first, nothing. Then came the unmistakable background hum of party music, clinking glasses, muffled chatter, and then Derek's voice, crystal clear. "We've softened him up. Just wait until the account transfer is signed." Simone's voice followed. "By Monday, we'll have scooped everything. He won't even realize until the ink's dry." The room froze. The file continued to play. Derek chuckled. "Let him play family for one more night. After that, it's all business." Simone's laugh followed, a low, satisfied sound. The recording stopped. I set the device down gently and looked at her. She stood motionless, her mouth open but no sound escaping. "I believe the phrase you used was scooping everything," I said. "Quite the term of endearment. That's not admissible." She finally choked. "You recorded us without consent." "Oh, I'm aware," I said. "But this isn't for court. This is for truth. And the people in this room, they don't need a courtroom to know what they've just heard." The notary set down her teacup with a faint click. Gerald crossed his arms. My lawyer, who had said almost nothing all morning, leaned forward. "Simone," he said, his tone firm, What we've heard today not only invalidates any claim you might attempt, it also opens the door for a countersuit. Fraud, coercion, possibly elder abuse. Are you sure you want to escalate this? Simone's face turned a sickly shade of gray beneath her makeup. Her mouth opened and closed again, but no argument came. This is your last chance to walk out with your name, I said. Not your dignity that's already been spent. But your name might still mean something to someone. Maybe. She looked around the room, searching for sympathy. But the witnesses stared back like stone. No one moved. No one bailed her out. The moment dragged on. Then finally she grabbed the folder, now useless, and turned on her heel. You've made a mistake, she hissed as she reached the door. No, I replied. I've made a decision. And I shut the door behind her. The click of the lock was louder than any gavel I'd ever heard. The room remained silent. Then Gerald whispered, well, that was definitive. I nodded and sat down, slipping Sophia's drawing from my coat pocket and laying it gently on the table. Now, I said, let's finish protecting what matters. The morning after Simone's dramatic exit, I woke before sunrise, not with the weight of regret or exhaustion, but with the clarity of someone who had finally stepped out of a long, uncomfortable shadow. The air felt still but resolute, like the calm before the final move in a game that had gone on too long. I made my coffee stronger than usual, not out of habit but preparation. This wasn't going to be a day of whispers and slow maneuvering. It was going to be written in ink, stamped, sealed, and filed. There would be no turning back, and more importantly, no room for misinterpretation. At precisely 9 a.m., I walked into the office of my long-trusted attorney, Louis Camden. Louis had been with me through the founding of my consulting firm, the sale of the business, my brother Edward's estate complexities, and even the adoption proceedings when I took legal guardianship of Sophia temporarily after her mother's accident. He didn't speak much when I entered, just nodded and gestured toward the thick file folder already on the conference table. He knew what today was about. I sat, folded my hands, and said the words aloud, clear as crystal. Let's start with the petition. I want full legal protective clauses filed immediately. Louis adjusted his glasses and replied, already drafted. Petition to bar any unauthorized financial action, including but not limited to account transfers, title changes, and beneficiary modifications, without direct notarized consent from you or a court-appointed fiduciary. Perfect, I said. And make sure the language includes retroactive protection in case someone tries to argue timing. He gave a satisfied nod. Already included. We reviewed it line by line, signing each section with deliberate precision. My signature, strong, unshaken, landed like a verdict. When we were done, I turned to the second stack. Now let's address the bank access and estate visibility. Louis flipped open the next folder. You'll be creating a restricted access list. Derek and Simone are now officially barred from viewing, requesting, or modifying any account information. This includes savings, investment portfolios, real estate titles, and all associated trusts. Good, I said, and I want that list sent to every institution, bank, brokerage, real estate registry. Everyone. Already prepared, he said, handing over a checklist of financial institutions with courier schedules and acknowledgement receipt forms. I paused. And not just banks. Health directives too. Power of attorney. Medical proxies revoke anything with Derek's name on it. Replace with Sophia's godmother for now. Or even you, until I designate further. Louis raised an eyebrow. Comprehensive, he said, but justified. We moved on to the final document. The will. This part was personal, not because of wealth, but because of the message it carried. Clause 14, I said. Strike it entirely. Derek and Simone are no longer beneficiaries of any property, capital, or revenue-generating assets. If they challenge it, the clause should redirect the disputed portion to Sophia's scholarship fund. Louis wrote quickly, his pen moving like a scalpel. And your primary heir? Sophia, I said. Via trust. She gets access in controlled disbursements, milestones, not lump sums. She doesn't need it now. She needs it protected. I reached into my coat and pulled out her drawing again. The treasure chest. I handed it to Louis. File this with the will, not as a legal attachment, as a reminder. Anyone who ever questions my intentions should see this first. He smiled gently. Understood. By noon, the papers were notarized, stamped, scanned, and logged with both state and federal systems. My digital vault updated its access keys, and I left with a thumb drive secured in a sealed envelope labeled in my own handwriting, to be opened by Sophia Whitmore, age 21, or in case of medical emergency declared by Dr. A. Lynn Carter. I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in years. Not because of the signatures or stamps, but because for the first time in a long while, my love for Sophia was finally backed by something more than warm words and bedtime stories. It was now protected by the law, by action, and by unwavering intent. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was declaring who I was, who she was, and who Derek and Simone had chosen to become. That was the day I stopped being their backup plan. That was the day I became my granddaughter's shield. That evening, just as the sun dipped below the hedges and the last amber rays reached through the curtains of my study, I sealed the envelope with wax. Not out of nostalgia, but because I wanted Sophia to know this wasn't a casual note. This wasn't a post-it or a scribble. This was weighty, intentional. A piece of her legacy wrapped in quiet finality. The red wax melted perfectly under the match. I pressed the old family stamp into it, the one I'd used on business contracts, wedding invitations, even her birth announcement 2 decades ago. It didn't feel ceremonial. It felt right. The next morning, I waited until her mother was distracted with brunch arrangements, and Sophia and I sat alone under the cherry blossom tree in the backyard, the one she'd named Petal Giant when she was 4. I placed the envelope gently in her lap. She looked at me with those impossibly wide eyes, the same ones that had whispered truth in the garden just nights ago. "It's for you," I said, smiling. "But not for right now. Later, when you're alone, somewhere that feels safe." She nodded solemnly, sensing it wasn't a game or a riddle this time. This was real. She tucked it into the little zipper pocket of her art satchel without a word, and we went back to talking about paintbrushes and foxes she'd seen near the fence. Hours passed. Evening crept in, and long after I'd gone inside, I heard her bedroom door close with its usual soft click. I imagined her climbing onto the bed, still in her day clothes, the satchel slung over one shoulder, the envelope finally in her hands. She'd know not to rip it open. She would hold it, study it, maybe even hesitate, but she'd open it carefully. Inside was a single page. No legal jargon. No threats. Just this. "Sophia, when you told me about the party night, about what your parents were planning, you didn't cry. You didn't scream. You just told the truth. And that was all I needed. That whisper saved me from the people I once trusted the most. Because of you, everything is safe now. For you, for what you'll become. This document is a copy of the trust. See the name at the top? That's yours. You don't need to understand every word right now. But one day, you will. And when you do, I want you to remember this. You were never just a child in the room. You were the only one who saw the storm coming. And you warned me. That's the kind of heart this world doesn't teach, but you already have it. Love, Grandpa." At the bottom of the envelope was a copy of the first page of the trust, her name printed in bold. Sophia Lynn Whitmore, primary beneficiary. She wouldn't know what that meant just yet, not entirely, but she would see her name. And that mattered. She'd know it wasn't a storybook or a fairy tale or a bedtime promise. It was real. It was written. It was hers. That night, I walked past her room once before bed. I didn't knock. I didn't eavesdrop. I just lingered for a breath outside her door. The light was off, but a small sliver of hallway glow revealed the shape of her head on the pillow, and underneath it, just barely visible, was the corner of the envelope tucked gently like a child's treasure map folded beneath a sleeping pirate's cheek. She had hidden it not because she feared it being taken, but because some part of her already understood its value. She had turned it into something sacred, and that told me everything I needed to know. I went to bed that night without locking the door, without checking the safe, without revisiting the folders or the estate plan. I didn't need to. What mattered most was already guarded. Not by law or locks or ledgers, but by a child's fierce and quiet loyalty. And that kind of inheritance, you don't sign. You earn. The papers went out on a Thursday, quietly, no spectacle, just a pair of certified envelopes, delivered to their gleaming white doorstep in the suburbs, one for Derek, one for Simone. I didn't need to be there to see their reactions. I knew them well enough to picture it frame by frame. Simone's manicured hands trembling just enough to smear her lipstick. Derek pacing, jaw tight, unable to process that control had slipped through his fingers. Not through violence, not through rage, but through something far more unsettling to them: preparation. I stayed home that day. I made a fresh pot of chamomile tea, the one with the honeyed aftertaste, and brought my chair to the porch just like I used to when Marjorie was alive. I didn't do much. I didn't need to. That's the beauty of a final move that's already made. There's nothing left to adjust. The sun was dipping lower into the horizon than usual, its amber edge sliding along the tops of the trees like the final stroke on a master's painting. I tilted my chair back, just slightly, and felt the first real peace I'd tasted in months wash over me like warm water. No alarms, no whispers through closed doors, no paperwork slipped in beneath casseroles and flattery. Just the porch, the breeze, and a little girl in the yard, chasing dandelion fluff like it mattered. Sophia ran barefoot, holding a stick she'd called a princess sword earlier that day. She was laughing, not the careful laugh of a child navigating grown-up tensions. No, this was something full, round, and untouched. She caught sight of me, beamed, and ran to the steps. "I pinned it," she said proudly. "My drawing. I wanted you to see." I followed her pointing finger to the front door. There it was, her drawing of the treasure chest, now wrinkled at the edges but holding steady under a piece of clear tape. She'd even added her name in purple crayon at the bottom, surrounded by a wobbly heart. That paper had been passed from her hand to mine, through storms of deception, legal defense, and a revelation about who truly stands by you when no one's watching. It wasn't just art. It was a flag, a seal, a declaration of what mattered. I stood slowly, knees stiff but spirit light, and joined her near the steps. "Looks like I've got new security," I joked. "Much better than those digital cameras your father tried to sell me on." She giggled, then looked up at me with that steady seriousness she slipped into now and then, the same look she'd worn in the garden when all this began. "You're not mad anymore, are you?" she asked. I took a breath, not because I didn't know the answer, but because it felt so rare to answer something without filters these days. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad. I'm done." She frowned. Done like tired or done like finished? I crouched to her level, something that still made my joints protest, but I did it anyway. Done like I don't have to fight anymore. The house is safe. The money is safe. And you, well, you're safe too. She nodded, satisfied, then skipped back to the yard. I watched her go, the late sunlight catching her hair like gold thread. Somewhere behind me, the phone buzzed a notification from my lawyer confirming the court filing was complete. Derek and Simone were officially barred from making any financial decisions on my behalf. My estate, investments, and healthcare decisions had been locked behind more legal fortresses than they could ever imagine. They'd find out soon enough just how thorough I'd been. No loopholes, no second chances, just consequences. I walked back to my chair, sat again. Let the silence fill in the spaces where tension used to live. My neighbors waved from across the street. I nodded back. Even the dog next door didn't bark. Everything had stilled. And for once, stillness didn't feel like surrender. It didn't feel like defeat. It felt like checkmate. because in all their scheming, they'd forgotten one thing. Age doesn't make you soft. It makes you sharp if you've paid attention. It teaches you how to wait, how to prepare, how to move only when it counts. So I did. And now, with my legacy intact and my granddaughter running circles around tulips, I leaned back into the porch light and let the quiet win. I looked up at the door again, at the crayon treasure chest guarding my home better than any vault, and I smiled. Stillness is not surrender. It's strategy. And this was mine.